funding sources, that could be where part of it comes from.
No.
There's some general funds, some utilities.
Just those two, and then the 8,000 that we got for social service grants. Maybe that's the third that you were
It's probably
thinking.
just social service grants. I mean, it's more than that because it's all the emergency aid as well as, but your specific grantee kind of is done.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
So utilities would be.
All right, welcome everyone. Today is Tuesday, March 29th, and this is the City of Topeka City Council's Economic and Community Development Committee meeting. It's 2 o'clock. We are waiting for Councilman Jensen. Hopefully he'll be here shortly, since this is largely the focus of the meeting was his idea. So we've got a couple orders of business to knock out, and hopefully he'll be here. I am Karen Hiller. I'm Councilwoman from District 1 and am chair of this committee. And my colleague is?
Jonathan Shum, District 4.
And our staff that are with us today are?
Doug Gerber, Deputy City Manager.
Corey Wright, Division Director of Department of Neighborhood Relations, Housing Services.
Rochelle Vega Ratana, Neighborhood Relations, Grant Administrator.
Thank you. And Angela Horn from the Council Office is support staff taking care of business for us too. Thank you. Our agenda today simply has a call to order, approving the minutes, and then talking about utility grants. So is anything else anyone wants to add to that agenda before we get going? If not, there are two of us now, but I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes from January 8th.
So moved.
Moved, seconded. Any discussion from anyone? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. We will go ahead and move on to this issue. Hopefully Brendan will be here shortly. The idea had been kind of twofold. We've talked about the utility grants on and off. On the council side in particular, the idea when utility rates were increased, the council spent a little time saying, what do we do about that? And then from the business side, Councilman Jensen had felt like this would be a good time, kind of in between grant cycles, for us to look at exactly what all we were funding with utilities and look at any administrative costs and consider whether there were more efficient ways to get those dollars on the street to people that needed them. So back to the council history in terms of needs and adequacy of funding. There he is, killing time for you.
Thanks. It's been one of those days.
The council considered what to do when they changed the rates, and debated should there be a sliding scale of rates, and decided no, the rates all needed to be the same, but we did need to keep an eye out for whether people were able to get their bills paid and how that was working. With that, Brendan, if you're ready.
What do you mean if I'm ready? Oh dear.
This being your issue in terms of looking at cost effectiveness of delivery for our utility programs.
Well, so one of the questions I had with that was, right now we have two organizations that are managing two separate programs, and I was interested to know would it be more cost effective if those programs were merged, and if so, then who would be the better party to handle that?
And in asking staff to prepare for the meeting today, I asked them to add to that mix the third source, which of course is the social service block grant itself, where we fund emergency aid agencies, and this year even have a set aside that's going directly through the housing program.
Excellent.
So to get started, maybe what we need to do is just identify what those sources are, how they are structured, and how many dollars are going through them. Does that sound good?
Yep.
Okay. And thank you everyone who's here in the audience, because we will, if there are discussions or clarifications about how those programs are working, we don't do a sign up in advance, but we're definitely going to be interested in hearing from you. So thanks for being here. With that, can we start with the franchise fee rebate program and just have staff explain? We have some handouts on that, as I understand it, thanks to GR sending some items in advance. So we've all got items in a packet. But if you could just explain in a nutshell how that program works and what the scope, what the volume has been.
Deputy Mayor, thank you. I can give a very high-level and brief overview, and then some of the more specific programmatic elements I think would be best answered by GR representing CRC,
Oh, okay.
since he is our, we do contract with them to help administer this grant. Not knowing all of the history, I can say that the franchise fee rebate has two separate funding sources. Part of that comes from utilities. That's for 2016, that's $100,000. And then part of it comes from the general fund. For 2016, that's $80,000. Those monies are kept with the city. We just on a month-to-month basis hear from CRC essentially that these people need this amount, and then we put that as a credit on their bill. As I understand it, how the program works, it never leaves our accounts. Is that not accurate?
That's not quite
Okay,
accurate,
well,
but I can certainly.
you should then,
clarify.
because if I'm
GR,
not
can
being accurate.
you, hate to make you get up, but
As it stands for 2016, there was $100,000 set aside for water, wastewater, and $60,000 that was set aside for gas and electric for this year.
116 for water or 116?
$100,000 for water, wastewater, which is held by the city at all times, and we just identify who the individuals are on a monthly basis to be credited their accounts, and then basically on a quarterly basis, about $30,000 twice comes to us. We hold that, and then those funds are paid directly to Westar or Kansas Gas Service. So we have $60,000 for the combined gas and electric.
And that's quarterly dispersed?
Approximately, yes.
Okay. So a total of 160,000 expected to go out.
Correct. We have not met that goal yet since we've come in contracted. But we've almost every year have expensed the gas and electric, but not quite on the water, wastewater.
And just to make sure, since we put you on the mic after we asked you to talk, this is G.R. Laughlin from the Community Resources Council, who administers the franchise fee program, and this is just your second year or third year?
Third year.
Okay.
Do you think the reason we're not meeting the water is the demand is not there, or we haven't reached out to enough people that could possibly use that?
I would say the latter of the two.
Okay.
Not reaching out?
Not being able to communicate it as well as
Yeah.
possible.
Reaching
to
out
the
was a
entire- reach out
bad
to
choice,
the
yeah.
entire community, yeah.
Okay.
There's still the education component of it is still an ongoing
Is that mentioned on
process.
their water bills in any capacity?
I can't answer that question.
Councilman, we, at the beginning of this last year, we engaged in a campaign after we rebranded another program, which we call WaterShare now. It used to be called Water RoundUp. We did an extensive engagement, sending out flyers in our bills on that particular program, but we haven't done a marketing campaign on the other piece, to the best of my knowledge. Additionally, just to clarify, I don't want to give you, or I don't want you to think you got false numbers from us. The 180,000, that also includes money that is budgeted from the city's general fund and utilities fund for administration. So that's where that number comes from.
Thank you.
Thank you. And what is the administrative? Is it a fixed fee?
It's a fixed contractual fee, yes.
Which is?
25,000.
Okay. Jonathan?
GR, is part of the concern that we're just starting the third year of this, and maybe the first 2 years people are still getting used to the idea that CRC is actually administering this program? Are we seeing an increase
Oh, I think we're feeling an increase. We do, our advertising, we do put out a postcard at the beginning of the season. We make it effective on a certain date, and more people are knowing where to come to get that support. We're getting the information out more easily through whether county commissioners or council members.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate the consistency that CRC can bring to that, so that folks can continue to rely on you guys to provide those services. And I do think the longer track record you have of that, the more folks in the community will reach out and those funds will be expended. Thank you.
You bet.
Do you have a sense for, I mean, you're housed at NetReach right now, so you've got some folks that are right there as well. Do you have a sense or some documentation in the geographic distribution? Do you know who's getting that money? Is there a profile?
Well, just as of myself, I've entered in quite a few of them myself, and it's quite a few folks that's either on the north side of town or on the east side of town. So geographically, it's clearly east and north. If you look at the documents I've provided you too, on other spreadsheets, we had as more elderly people are being serviced as well.
And that may come because of, in the past, I don't know if Jocelyn's here yet, but there were some routines where people got alerted about that when they got help with their taxes and their homestead rebates, and people kind of packaged that up and annually.
Yes, and
had a
we're an
routine
AARP site as well for tax preparation, and so we have what we call Open Thursday. So they can get their taxes done that day and immediately apply for the franchise fee credit program as well. Now, my understanding is the program's been around a long time. It's just, and it was actually administrated through the city in past years, but up until the last 3 years has been, contracted with us.
I recall some of the discussions when that change happened. Could you briefly describe what the admin goes for and what you do before somebody actually gets that money? And what the steps are that you...
There's a series of forms that have to be filled out. We want to verify if they meet all the criteria that was given by the city council at the time in the years that it was approved, that there were certain, and in front of you, there should be a franchise fee rebate credit program, frequently asked questions, and whether or not they met all the qualifications, as in household, 32,400, et cetera, and all the other factors of either age or a minor child in the house, but they still have to meet the 32,004, and they have to be a city resident in most cases. And then they have to bring copies of their bills and anything else that needs to be proved up via the income or age of the children, or and then that's 32,400 is a household income.
And so, are you able to I'm wanting to draw you out for the benefit of the newer council members, but so how do you verify that, and then what steps do you take to actually pay their bills for them? How do you do that?
Well, the process is they're notified, they come to us unless they're homebound, and that's a different process altogether. Obviously, in the past, we've actually gone to their homes with 2 people where we've changed the process a little bit, and it's done more via the mail system right now as to keep them involved. And or have representatives from their family come and help them process the paperwork. But the paperwork's then processed. It's determined whether or not they get it. Do they qualify? And their name has to be on the bill to verify that it's from their home. And then so they provide documents of all the different bills, and then they can receive up to $60 in water, $40 in wastewater, $25 in gas, and $50 in electricity. So they may qualify for one or all of those items. Once that is done, then it's processed. They're entered into the client track, which is the new Homeless Management Information System, HMIS. Once that's entered in, then the deduplication process is done to ensure that there's no different family members came at different time to process the paperwork, so we're ensuring that only one credit goes per household. And then the process, then we notify water department, and they take care of the water, wastewater. processing of the credit, and that goes onto the bill. No money goes directly to the client. It actually goes directly to the providers of the utility, as well as we send a separate spreadsheet to Kansas Gas Service and Westar Electric.
And they
And
do
that,
the
that
same
process takes sometimes between 2 and 3 months to get it processed and on their bills of credit.
If we write a check to those two utility companies from the 60,000, that's provided by the city. So
Tally it up.
spreadsheet and check go in hand each month with the full client listing.
So you don't have to have any further contact with the client after that?
Oh, not generally. That they will call. You know, if it's sooner than the date, then we review. We pull their file to find out when they actually applied and try to help them through that process. But folks are getting a good feeling of how that works.
So how, since you all are out in the field per se, working with some of these folks, how has you all administering this program been a benefit to the community as opposed to having the city do it? I'm not familiar with exactly the reasons why that it was shuffled out there, but in some cases I could understand where moving it might be a benefit because you guys are, quote unquote, in the weeds.
Well, I know that it was costing the city a great deal of money to administer it because folks were coming in all the time. There was, it was more of an open door policy, coming anytime they want, and it really can be disruptive to the staff of trying to manage that, whether it's the water department or whomever's trying to handle the gas and electric side of it. So it's kind of a one-stop shop. Get it transposed through the system and get the application done quickly, and it's easier for us to follow up. Obviously, we have direct access to the HMIS system, Client Track, and so we can verify if they've been, have already received funding for that. One of the agreements for the franchise fee credit program also is that this would be on top of any other resource that was to be available to them in town. So they could not be held out. If they got credit for the franchise fee, they would still be eligible at all the other services in town for the once-a-year help for utility as well. It would be not in lieu, but as simultaneously.
There were apparently a few bugs with that this year.
Well,
Or there always?
every year there's always somebody that is new to an organization and needs a little learning, but they usually the client usually comes back around and will get help.
Deputy Mayor, if I may?
Yes.
I did speak to the agency that was concerned about that, and they did have a staffing change. And so from she said 2, maybe 3 weeks, they did not know that the community has decided that would not supersede them getting assistance later. And that they thought that maybe 2 or 3 people got denied during that time. So it's not an overall. I think the emergency aid meetings and the homeless task force meetings, everyone agreed that we would not make that a one-time, once a year deal.
But I would imagine that it would be hard for the city to get an employee for $25,000 a year to administer the program.
I agree totally. Yeah.
So.
Well, and our city folks don't have the time to go out into the community the way that CRC folks do to engage with other nonprofits and other people. We simply just don't have the staff capacity to do that. So.
And we do have the forms in both Spanish and English as well. So.
And bilingual staff.
And bilingual staff.
Excellent.
Yeah, because the city, and Doug has something to,
Yeah.
he's next, but city didn't have any trouble getting rid of all the money. But the estimate was, and so it may be different people getting it, I don't know, but the estimate on the city's staff was that it was taking 50% of somebody's time. Perhaps because it was things they didn't normally do, and one of the reasons I wanted GR to talk about that checking is that took time, and that just double checking with everybody seemed to, and that's, I don't remember enough about it to know whether your system, except that you've got the HMIS stuff in-house, has otherwise worked out some economies in that time, or whether.
Well, it just makes it simpler because we're not only entered into one database, we're looking at the same database. If you're a city employee trying to look at water, it's going to be more difficult because now you have to make specific contact to Westar or Kansas Gas Service, so it kind of puts it all in one house, And you look at one database and find out if they have it, don't have it, are they qualified, and going through that process. I think it's just a lot more streamlined as it was. The estimate that I heard when we were first talking about it, when Nancy Johnson was the executive director, it was around $80,000 cost to the city to manage that program. Now, I can't corroborate that, but it's just, that's what I remember.
I don't know about 80, but, 50, 30 to 50, given halftime with a fully loaded salary in an office and computer and all those things, I think. I was there, but I don't know, can do absolutely by the penny. Doug?
Deputy Mayor, thank you. Really, what I was going to say has been taken up in this last 5 minutes. I was going to comment that it would be difficult for us to pay an employee $25,000 to do what they do. Having it all in a one-stop shop is helpful for our customer. This transition happened prior to my arrival, but anecdotally, people never were able to get to the right place. The right person was never available to help them. Never is too strong, but it just became a
But that
challenge
one person.
to providing good customer service, and this way, for our $25,000, we can do that.
Thank you. There'd been some suspicion, I really hadn't thought through how this is gonna go. This is really helpful, thank you. There'd been some suspicion that might really stretch you guys. Does that seem, now that you've done it and kind of shook it down, that's?
Well, being able to have the files, we have the client files with us as well, and so now each year, if it's the same person repeating, that's why we put out a postcard of somebody that may have gotten it last year. We'll get a postcard this coming year, or anybody who has in the program. So it streamlines, we don't have to create another file, there's already one done. That expedites the process.
Okay. Thanks. We'll probably loop back around. If we can, okay, so this is one that goes to people who actually pay the bills. It's supposed to be a rebate on the franchise fee that was part of that bill. That's the theory, right? And so they get a rebate on whatever bill they actually had, and it is kept separate from the emergency aid money, right? Sure, okay. Let's add the next one then, and have whoever should explain what's happening these days with the water share program. Who that goes to and how that one works.
Okay, again, Deputy Mayor, I'll provide a few details and then maybe ask Suzanne Brower to step up. She works with that. We could also have GR step to the mic. They both work with that. The water share program is sort of the second component of our utility aid outreach. Prior to the beginning of this year, it was called Water RoundUp. That was a carryover from when we thought our water system was able to round up your bill, so that if your bill was $72.23, it rounded up those 73 cents and you could donate that. Apparently that was never even the case. It never rounded up. It was just sort of, if you wanted to give a donation, you could. And so we've changed it to more accurately reflect what happens. And as noted previously, we embarked on a campaign several months ago to put information in water bills so that folks could kind of understand the rebranding, and that it's an opportunity to share some resources with those folks in need. I would say it's early to tell what the results of that campaign has been, but I think maybe in the near future we'll be putting out some more information and kind of reminding people that that's an option that's available for them. In the past, I'd say the average has been $15,000 or so. That's a nice round number. That's close.
Who distributes that money and what's the process for that?
If I can, let's get to that just a
Okay.
second. In the past, it's been 15,000 or so, and then tell how people make that commitment, and then give us an idea whether that number's going up or down.
Deputy Mayor, as indicated, I think it's probably early to tell whether it's going up and down, but it's probably fair to say it's steady.
Okay.
The campaign hasn't made a significant difference. We did send out forms, which is typically the way people do that. We sent those out in bills in the recent past for folks to be able to donate. So that's typically the way we receive those donations, is folks say, I want to donate X per month or X amount.
That's what I wanted you to clarify. Do they have to sign up for a monthly, or can they do a one-time?
I'll look to my staff to help answer that.
Do it one time.
Okay, So they can do it each month when they pay their bill and just decide,
Yes.
or they can set it up so it's always an extra $20 a month or whatever they want. All right, thank you. Brendan?
So then, where does it, how is that money distributed and who would get it? What's the process for that?
I'll let GR talk you through those details.
GR Laughlin with CRC.
GR.
Over since 2010, I've been working with the process. I get it from the water department, sent to me, that we had this much money from this last month of receipts received, and typically it's been between 15,000 and 17,000 since 2010 on average per year. $1,200, $1,300, $1,400 a month. Then there's an equation that's been set, and it's broken out into 3 organizations: Doorsteps, Salvation Army, and Let's Help. And they each get a percent of the receipts from the previous month. I usually get an email the first week or first few days of the month, and by that day or the very next day, I usually process and get it to those agencies of how much funds they have to utilize. And then they work directly with the water department. They disperse it to the different clients as what funds they have to work with, and then they notify the water department it's going to be this specific amount of money, and that is then credited back to that person's water bill.
So this is water only.
Water only.
And so does you actually give them the money, or is it all still a credit?
All it stays right with the city.
Okay. And this is included in the 25,000 that we're already paying them to manage the other aspect of it?
Well,
That's a
as far as
question
we've
to
never
GR.
been paid for that, it's just something we have done
Ah,
as portion of our funding through the city for our service grants.
oh,
Or
okay.
for our contracts, it's just
Okay.
part of what we do.
So even before the other one came on board,
Mhm.
you handled this, at least for some years, and it never had any admin in it.
Nope, it's just as part of the contract I have for social services contract, that was just something that we do at CRC as one of the many of the items that we do.
So it's just a task that's included in the larger contract that we have with CRC.
Okay.
So, and someone could qualify for that and the water utility credit?
Well, that's still based on the one-time, that's
Okay.
outside of the franchise fee. Each individual, it's been set up as an unwritten rule within our community that if you're helped with utilities, you're helped once a year. Now, the franchise fee is on top of that if
Okay.
you qualify. Otherwise, that it'd be once a year, whether it comes out of ESG money or CDBG money or
So utility help is just once a year,
one time.
and just correspondingly for some framework, food you can get how often?
Food baskets approximately every 60 days. And that's where we get together as a community of HMIS users, and we look at that and we say, at the food part of it, and just say, do we have any more resources to do it more often than 60 days? And the answer is usually, unfortunately, no. But we've kept it at 60 days. But it's up to the agencies that are participating how often that they want to hand out food, for instance. But utilities, it's been said as a rule, is once a year. Now, there's other cases that might come along that would merit something else, but that's up to each individual agencies on their requirements for their funding source as to how often they might do that.
So, if I might, how big an impact does this make in someone's life? Because I'm thinking through the utilities I have, and in the middle of winter, $25 is not going to put a dent in my gas bill. $50, not a dent in my electricity. So how?
Well, it may not put a dent in your utility bill, but it might help you on groceries end. So it's all in a pot of money, and so
It allows me to shift resources to something
Yeah,
else. Okay.
it's a great help
Okay,
in
okay.
anything that they can get.
And that would make sense to me. I'm trying to think through how I would apply that to my life,
Sure.
but then again, I don't struggle like some of these people do.
And again, this was in response to the fees going up and the concern that
Mhm.
lower income families would be hurt by those fees, if that's correct. So this was to offset some of the financial troubles that the increased fees could cause.
If we're referring to water, I'm sorry,
Not
what's
water.
the name? Everyone still calls
Water
it water
share.
roundup. Water share, okay. That has been going on for quite some time. way before my
Sure.
time.
That was Pete Tavares's idea when he was District 2 representative. So that dates it for people.
Too young.
I was looking for Lisa back there. She probably could say, well, forever, right?
Okay.
Deputy Mayor, it's my understanding historically that at least the utility piece of the franchise fees were in reaction to the '09 rate increases, particularly the base increase. I'm gonna look at Nicole, and I think she'll give me a yes on that.
Well, the general fund piece anyway, the extra 80,000.
Since that time,
Okay.
I believe that our utility rate base fees have dropped back to that level where they were previously. The base fee, not the volume charge. Just by way of, for a frame of reference.
Right, I mean, we dropped the minimum, actually, if you were a minimum user.
In 2014, yes.
Yeah.
For 15, 16, and 17.
Mm-hmm. But if you got a big family or one way or another, or a high user, you could end up with a higher bill than you correspondingly would have had in 2013, right?
You know, at the time, we estimated that most residential users would see
A little bit.
probably a decrease because of the base rate going down. It went down almost $5, I believe.
Yeah, the base went down, but if you use 5,000 or more,
5,000
think
was
it's up.
about the cutoff, yeah.
mm-hmm. Yeah, so good point. We added to that. Otherwise, the franchise fee program itself has been, I don't know how long time, hasn't it? The credit? I think so. To put this in context then, we also, Corey, how much money are we donating to emergency aid and utilities if it's broken out through our social service grants?
It's not actually broken out, but we have CDBG funded 30,000 for Catholic Charities, and then another 49,000 for doorstep. That's for rent and utilities, and the utilities are not broken out within those utilities. So at a later time, we'd be able to pull a report on that, but at this time, we're having some struggles with Client Track getting that report to generate. So we're working on that.
Okay, so for this year, for 2016 anyway, we've got 79,000 out of social service block grant for rent and utilities, and then we also reserved, what, about 9?
Yes,
Then-
9,698.
9698, which we just ended up with, we had reserved and then decided to definitely put it forward for utility assistance, and in this case, it's going through your homeless program, right?
Not homeless program, they don't have to be homeless, but we're running the program just like the agencies would run it on poverty levels, using poverty levels for them to qualify.
Okay, well, if you could describe then, or have the appropriate person describe how you manage that program.
Let me do it.
Okay. We created a policy to go into effect. The applicant, we would try to work off referrals from the water department if they see that they're elderly, disabled. I believe they would need to have paid on the bill at least twice. They would come into our office to do an intake. They would have to fill out an application, income qualify, picture ID, social security card, proof of income, and then we would get the dollar amount from the water department on how much they owe, or if they're shut off. You know, how much will it take to get the service back in their name, because there's usually a disconnect fee, reconnect fee, all the fees, plus the past due bill. We want to get it all taken care of. We don't want to put them on any type of pay agreement. We want to start them off with a zero balance. And then we would do like a interfund transfer, or what is it, journal entry, I believe, because it's within the city. So from the general fund to the water department is how they would get it, and it would be applied to that person's account.
Okay, so 100% of the money that's in the, name it for me, I mean, the,
Department of Neighborhood Relations.
and just,
that one.
that's what you
Yeah.
would call it, I mean,
That's-
the
that's all we're
DNR
calling it.
program,
Yep.
okay,
Mhm.
is going to water.
Yes, 100%.
And so, and what you're saying, Rochelle, is that then if it was Doorstep or Let's Help or whoever the grantees are, they would do the same?
Well, all this money is through our department.
Understood.
And so if they received monies like Doorstep or Catholic Charities, I believe they're following pretty much the same
Same
procedure.
process.
They would
Okay.
take an application, income qualifying, get all the necessary documents also.
And they too then would look at how much is, that they've made some effort at paying in the past, and that there's enough money so that you can get them caught up and they can move forward.
Yeah, at least with the other agencies, they have to have a disconnect notice. And I believe on ours too, we would want that disconnect notice, to pay the disconnect notice portion, not the whole bill. Because we don't want them to be without utilities, so we
Mhm.
want to pay that disconnect notice so they won't be disconnected. But if they're already shut off, we want them to start them in a zero balance.
So, and I may need to back up for the other one, but, so what's the range of, what's a typical payment that an agency would make, and who, you mentioned seniors, who's getting that money?
The agencies, I believe, they can set their own caps. I believe there's some agencies that set $400. I mean, that's kind of up to the agency. But if you have a disconnect notice that's maybe they owe $500, the agencies try to pay, well, we'll pay $400, and the applicant would need to come up with a difference. And 95% of the time, I believe they're able to come up with that difference.
Okay.
On our side, we haven't set a cap at this time.
So what's, I mean, you're just a few months
The-
into it, what's the average payment?
I've only done two. One of them, I believe, was $200 and some, but then I worked with an 85-year-old lady, and it was $1,000.
She had an extreme water leak.
Yeah, there was.
And several months back, and was still trying to get that taken care of, and to the point where she got a disconnect. So we were able to help her with that.
That was like a referral we got from the water department, because this lady, she was 85 years old, and she was not able to handle her finances correctly, and it just overwhelmed her.
Okay. And back to, if we could, to the RoundUp program.
Water share.
Water share. I'm trying to remember if there's a fixed number, if you could let us know who's getting that money and an idea of what the
What
range
client
or
or
the
what
average.
agencies?
The citizens.
The citizens, that's up to each individual agency that receives the water share funds,
Okay.
which is Doorstep, Let's Help, and Salvation Army.
Mm-hmm. So it might, I just wondered who actually is getting it. Mostly seniors again, I'm hearing seniors or families, or it just happen to be?
We might be able to pull some out. I can actually bring that fund out perhaps later on and take a look at it individually and give you more later on, to do some analysis on it and find out more specifically on ages for those folks on a separate spreadsheet. But if you look at your service summary report, just to let you know,
Yeah.
in front of you on page 13 and 14, on the bottom of 13, we have the aggregates of electricity, gas, and then on page 14, water. And those total 114,739 for the three categories. And that's just not even the first quarter, that's through the 28th of March. So we'll still give out funds this week that will be significant, but, so right now that is all aggregated, like for food, for water, all of the water share would be in there, and whatever emergency other aid monies that folks do actually falls in that category. Now, I can break it out separately as it's still listed as water roundup and not water share in the system, but
Well, so people can kind of do the math and figure out what the average is anyway of the
Sure.
payments, and the unduplicated clients, when you call it a client, that's the households.
Correct.
That's how many people got served, and then we can get an idea from here, everybody who reports in anyway.
Right.
So this kind of perfectly brings up why we had some interest in this. Right now, it looks to me like people have to go to 3 different places to get assistance with utilities. And,
Well, it's actually more than that, but.
well,
yeah.
to your point, though, so now somebody is gonna spend an exorbitant amount of time trying to get help instead of focus on their own problems or taking care of business. Is this really the best thing for our community, as opposed to have everything in one place so they can fill out one form, get the help that they need, and get back to trying to find a job or to taking care of a sick loved one or whatever they do during the day? This is a whole lot of running around. Is that the right thing to do for the people in our community?
Well, I would ask if there really is a whole lot of running around, in the sense that a lot of these organizations, whether they're coming to Avondale East or they're going to Salvation Army or Let's Help or Doorstep, I believe their needs are being met as best they can at that particular place. So for some folks who are walking or taking the bus, it's much more convenient to go to a place they already know versus trying to figure out how to get to Avondale East instead of the Salvation Army. Especially if, I believe you said earlier, most of the recipients are on the east side or the north side of town, which those, correct my geography if I'm wrong, but I believe all 4 of those organizations fall into that category, east or north.
Well, Doorstep is central too, but that, you know,
Yeah.
that kind of, the boundary kind of floats there a little bit, but.
Sure.
Not to mention having to fill out 3 different sets of paperwork to get assistance from 3 different organizations.
Well, most of those organizations also take appointments too as well and try to get folks, they just can't go in any old time they want to, so they usually set up and have appointments, whether at Doorstep, Let's Help, or Salvation Army. And as long as they meet those appointments, that helps them facilitate that process a little bit. It's still cumbersome because if they're out of funds, then they have to contact another agency to find out who has funds. So it is a challenge in cases for clients.
And if you could give us 2 other figures that would help us frame this. You mentioned that in the that you gave us a service summary that's basically the first quarter of the year. It's through the 28th of March.
Yep.
Yesterday, that's pretty awesome.
And if you notice on page 14, we're talking about $1.2 million that's been distributed within the organizations, and they're listed at the page 1 of what organizations actually input information. But that's $1.2 million. So we'll typically see between $5 and $7 million a year on total funds put together. And that does not include costs of bed nights, whether it be transitional housing, permanent housing, or emergency shelters, just so you know.
And what was your number? We can figure it out, but you had added up the utility number
Correct.
for us
It was,
for the first quarter.
yeah, for the first quarter of those 3 items, all put together, $114,739.
So the 114,739, and can you've got the list of the agencies in the front, but what other sources of funds are going into that?
Well, there's different, like, there's an organization, the Countryside Christian Church. They save so much money and they put it in a pot, and then they might be able to help 6 clients out at their congregation. And so they'll put monies into utilities as well. We have many churches that donate into Doorstep, and I'm sure Lisa can talk more eloquently at it than I, but they have a lot of organizations that put money in, and so they have different funding source, as does Let's Help. So not only do they have funds that come in from the city or the county, they have funds that come in from other organizations, and so different pots of money.
And is United Way still put
Yes.
money in substantially?
To different organizations, I couldn't tell you which ones off the top of my head, but yes.
So what we're
Or
looking at is
EFSP, Emergency Food and Shelter Program, which is offered, it's kind of comes down, it's managed by United Way. I sit on both the boards for the county as well as the Rochelle, and then on the state board as well. And so we have funds that come down for that as well, for EFSP.
And so those sources are all going into this 114,739,
Correct?
and I'm flipping quick, but this is just utility money. This is not rent and utilities.
That's correct, just utilities.
Okay.
So, if you want to, and we talked earlier, if you're talking about a needs assessment, this could be indicative of the need, because there's so much money going out. This is an actual use. So one of the things that we had talked earlier, how do we determine, is there enough, what's the need out there? It's very difficult to get folks that enter stuff into the system that are going to deny. Let's say I call Doorstep and say they don't have any electric money. And so then they enter me into the computer as they tried to help me, and I was looking for $300 in electric help. Then I call Let's Help, and then they enter me into the system. So just to get folks to enter a non-help item in is very difficult to do. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult when staffing is expensive. So, you know, that's one of the biggest costs that we see in most nonprofits is labor costs. So you'll try to be as efficient as you can. So it's more difficult to assess a need.
So what we've got is, there's about 25,000, it looks like, in round numbers on this report for first quarter for rent and mortgage assistance. So if you add that, since we've got rent money in one of ours, that's 140,000 first quarter for utilities, rent and mortgage, compared to our total of 160 plus 79 plus about 10, let's make that 80 and 10, 90, 250,000 a year from us, from the city, total. So that'd be roughly 60,000 of that first quarter, let's say. So we're providing 60,000 of that maybe, and other people 80?
Yeah.
That, did anybody bring numbers exactly for what
We
the
don't.
totals are out in the community? Okay, so that's somewhat of a guess.
Well, I would refer you back to the client track report too, if we're looking at, you were talking about seniors earlier. If there's 449 families that got wastewater assistance, 300 were seniors, so that's 67% of the people that were seniors, and then respectively the water is at 60%. Just for point of reference.
Wow,
And that's age
Good.
60.
good observation, thank you.
Sure.
You know, and one reason to know that is we were concerned, for instance, at the council level about families. So if 67% of this money, all of it, is going to seniors, then families may not be accessing this. As the
Well,
need's gotta be as great.
It's seniors and families, so it's possible that there's other family members, but there's.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, so,
Yeah, because there's a lot of grandparents taking care of minor children.
yes.
That's true. Okay. So did the other agencies do the same thing you do then, in terms of getting on HMIS to see if people are already clients? And
Absolutely.
contacting the utilities with the direct phone calls and so on?
My understanding is most agencies do not give funding directly to the client. They actually get to the source, whether it's a landlord or whatever. I mean, unless it's a house payment, and that would go directly to the client. But sometimes I would assume that they actually might just send it directly to the mortgage holder.
I know that some years ago, Community Action had the emergency center, and there was a convocation of sorts, and it was decided then that the various emergency aid things that they were doing, and they did them well, and they did a lot of it, but because of that amount of time that was spent by everybody saying we're out of money, try and call somebody else, or checking and so on, that there was some thought then, if that's where you were going with your question, that that if we consolidated how many sources there were, the cost effectiveness would be better in terms of the staff time and the demand there, as well as the dollars going out in the street.
Well, and there's two factors there. We want to make it more cost effective if possible, but I think more importantly is making sure we've reached everyone as much as we can. We want to make it as simple for people that are already struggling with, whatever life issue they have, to get the help they need so they can go back to taking care of their problems. So the next question is, how do we improve the system we have and make it better?
And with that well-stated question, unless there are some other questions or comments up here, I'd like to open it up and get some input from people who are here.
Just real quickly before we do, Doug, Mr. Deputy City Manager, you weren't here last meeting, but Sasha had reported that your recommendation was not to combine the grants. Just wanted to hear your reasoning behind that, if that statement from Sasha was accurate as to your thoughts on that.
Councilman, thank you. I don't know that I have strong thoughts on combining versus not, but some general thoughts I have would be that I think we have a good relationship with CRC in terms of how they manage it for us, particularly from the perspective that it just takes the burden off of our staff and seems to get it to the appropriate people. The thing that I think from a staff perspective we're fairly opinionated about is that the money stay in the city coffers and gets credited folks rather than writing checks.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever process we decide, I think on balance, it seems to be working well, and so I haven't heard compelling reasons to move it. But if it were to be moved, I think the money would need to remain so it can be credited to folks.
I'd agree.
Thank you.
And that could happen with any vendor, theoretically.
Of course, yes.
Okay. Could we get some input from you all? Are there people we're missing, and how would we get them? Are there ways we could be more cost effective with the delivery system for utilities?
Or how could we simplify the delivery systems for various folks?
If at all.
Well, and are we asking that CRC simply not hand out to Salvation Army doorstep, et cetera, and they just keep the funds not in-house, but they just run the program from there? Is that
I don't want
is
to
that our
state
idea?
specifics yet. I mean,
Okay.
the goal is to try and find ways to reach people better. And if CRC is functioning as a hub, then to some degree I could see that argument. But then again, they can't be everywhere all the time. And so, the fact that the money comes to them and then gets distributed, at least there's still that central hub of information, whether or not that falls all the way out to the individuals or not.
I guess I'm just trying to see where in this process that we've heard about the simplification would come. And that seems to be the extra step,
Mm-hmm.
is the flow through of CRC allocating to doorstep, Salvation Army, et cetera. That's help. So in the terms of simplifying, that's my question is that the most obvious simplification? Is that a good step to go down? Kind of, what are we looking at? We'd love feedback.
Joel?
Good afternoon. John Homeless from Community Action. I'll speak as a person whose responsibilities is to supervise and oversee our rent and utility program at Community Action. I don't speak for the agency, and God knows they probably don't want me to. I support the way in which things are going currently for a number of reasons. It may be helpful for you to understand that in the case of rent and utility or any kind of utility assistance, there are two segments, for the lack of a better word. One is what CRC is handling currently is really a rebate system to assist families that are having trouble meeting their obligations in terms of either rent or utility. And then there's a segment of us that deal with emergency assistance. And in my view, there are two different approaches. In our case, in the case of emergency assistance, the family is in imminent danger of either making their home uninhabitable because of a loss of utilities, or they are facing eviction. So that the emergency aid approach is really to prevent homelessness. And those funds flow through the federal government primarily through the HESG funds, which are administered by neighborhood relations. And then there are some private funds that are provided, and United Way is one of the principal ones in that in terms of basic needs, that also provides funding for render utility assistance. Now, their criteria for serving families are different. In the case of the HESG funds, that is established by the federal government. So income guidelines, the fact that you have to have a disconnect notice or you have to have an eviction notice are all determined by the federal government. In the case of United Way, to a large extent, the individual applicant agency can determine what criteria it will use. In both cases, in the case of the HESG and the United Way, the individual agency can set its own cap. For example, in the case of community action, our cap on utility would be $400, the cap on rent would be $600, and that would be once a year. What the current system allows for, and I think it works pretty well, at least I've taken advantage of it on occasion, that if a person comes to us and says, we need help with our utility bills, one of the first questions we do in a pre-certification over the phone is, do you have a disconnect? Because if you don't, that's the deal breaker. So we can then refer that individual to the funds that CRC administers. If they say, well, I know I'm not going to be able to pay next month's bill.
But they're not in crisis immediately.
They're not in crisis. And so that population gets served, I think, pretty effectively by what CRC is able to provide.
How do you know that CRC has funds?
We call them up.
See, there's an issue there, though, in that we're just handing people back and forth between agencies when there's not a definite knowledge of funds.
Well, I think we're in close enough connection with CRC on a pretty regular basis for us to know. If they say, I mean, I think it's our obligation as a service provider to do whatever we can to provide the best benefit to the person who's seeking help. Mm-hmm. If they meet the federal criteria for rent utility assistance, then that's who we serve them through. If they don't, then we can appeal to the United Way funds and say, can we work with you through that? Now, if we find out that the person is really needing financial assistance to pay their bill, then the first point of contact would be CRC, because we know that they administer the programs where those funds reside, and then find out from them if they are going to be able to assist or not. So it's not a simple rejection, and I think on the other hand, in some cases, if you've been in the business long enough, particularly from the emergency shelter grant side, it's entirely possible to call a utility company and negotiate a sort of slow code and prevent them from acting or try to convince them to not act on the eviction or the disconnect. There are times when we're able to call a landlord and say, hey, it's not in your benefit to run after the eviction of this person because they don't have a bad rental history, they hit a bump in the road, all kinds of things could be going on, and try to work with them to slow it down. But I have not found in any instance where when our people have referred to Community Resources Council, that we've been told that we don't have any funds.
Yeah.
That there's a time frame in which that service can be provided, and it's worked out.
So procedurally, the process you follow essentially is identical to some degree what CRC does. And they come in, they fill out an application,
Right.
you vet them, and if it's approved, then you all cut checks directly to either the landlord or the utility company, or in the case of the city, it's a credit.
Correct.
So procedurally, it's identical to what CRC does, other than your funding sources are slightly different and you have self-imposed caps that are slightly different.
Yeah, there can be variations within that process, but essentially it's a process that I think most agencies, as a matter of fact, I think all agencies would follow in terms of emergency assistance. I think that what they do and what we do is very similar. They may have different criteria, we have different criteria, but taking an application, trying to assess the client's needs, taking the demographic information that's going to be fed into Client Track are all things that we all do.
So I'm wondering if it's possible then for the nonprofit world to develop a common application that someone would use, be it either electronic or in paper, so that somebody could go to one organization and fill out that piece of paper once, and then either the organization could help move that to the correct funding source, or an individual could take it around, as opposed to having them repeatedly complete different applications for what sounds to me, as somebody on the outside, to be realistically a very similar process.
So it's a clearinghouse, what you're saying essentially is a single clearinghouse.
Well, not so much a single clearinghouse. In the future, maybe, but for now, so if you and CRC, for example, would use the exact same application form. So I go to CRC and apply, and they look over my application and they say, no, I could be much better funded by your organization, then I don't have to come to you and fill out another application. CRC can either send my application to you, or I can carry it over there. That might be an interesting, phase one to sort of simplify some of that.
If I may, for a second. The city of Topeka just received a COC, Continuum of Care Planning Grant for the next coming year. And it's a grant that works with both the COC funded agency and the ESG. I'm saying lots of initials, I'm sorry. Continuum of Care funded agencies and Emergency Solutions Grant agencies. And it is a requirement in the COC that we have a unified document and a single application. And so what you're talking about is exactly what we will be working on here in the near future. And those agencies that are funded with those funds will be required to use that form that is created by hopefully all of us in the room. So
Is it going to be ACDS compliant?
I have not started the creation of the document yet, and my hopes is we're going to get everybody together to make sure that everybody's components of what they're requesting and what they need data for will be on the document.
So we get to create a bunch of fancy acronyms. That's going to be fun.
You already did. Nobody knows what ACDS is.
That was a joke, people. Ha ha. I know it's only Tuesday. So, how do we use technology to do this better? Would that
working
be
on it.
something that then CRC would, I guess, be the keepers of?
GR and CRC are a crucial component of that task, and they'll definitely be a part of it. Client Track is definitely going to be a part of it.
That was my next point.
So
Okay.
yeah, without a doubt, all of that will be considered when we're creating that form.
Well, I think that's a fabulous first phase, realistically, and that would be, I don't know, make things much easier for an individual, especially if they could do it on their phone or on a computer and then just have it sent to an agency.
All of our desperately poor folks would do so.
You'd be surprised.
Understood. John, did you have some more to add?
No, I just wanted, I wanted to talk in support of what the current system is, that it is not inefficient. It is working. We use it as it exists right now. I think with what Corey is saying, that the future really is a single application form. It's been discussed for a number of years, now it's gonna be imposed, which I think is a good thing. I mean, I would support that. But I think the question that you raised was, is the current system working with CRC, is it efficient and so on? And I think the distinction between emergency services and the other system of voucher and so on may help clarify it, because some of us are in the emergency assistance where it's a quick turnaround and you're trying to keep the people from being, in fact, they fill a gap that none of the federal money or even some of the other money is able to fill. And
Well, if we can flip that though a little bit, because we're talking technology and forms, which is important. And you know, we're not really talking about CRC's money or whatever. I think that this was generated because the city is putting money in, and the city is placing it with CRC and is placing it through other places and is handling some itself. And so from the client perspective, if I'm hearing correctly, what we have is some emergency needs, and then some just, I'm short on money and I know once a year I can go get this needs, if you will. And so then the context of that client's services would be that the connection, in terms of other client services, CRC also is hooked in with the AARP tax system. Are there other client services that if somebody's coming to your, now of course you're in NetReach, so that's a good change, but other client services that CRC is providing if someone came to your door, either needing the referral or needing the money that you have?
We do provide copies of the LEAP application and other type of applications so when they do show up. Or we encourage them if they're needing more help beyond the franchise-free credit, that they interact either with Community Action, Salvation Army, Let's Help, or Step In, or if they're a part of the mission, that they can also find another revenue source there. So of other resources other than just utility, those questions come up regularly, and it may be JAAA and Jocelyn's group and what help they might need, because we do work with a lot of seniors. A lot of them are coming in and having their deceased spouse of 30 years still on their water bill, and it takes time to, or on any of their utilities, it takes time to get those names, and we kind of help facilitate that as well.
And again, I'm just trying to clarify the context, but that's the only kind of client services work that you do, is work with those clients in your case. When people are going straight through the department, and this may be just a one-time thing, but when they are in Corey's program, you're talking about getting money to a fairly limited, to the people you're involved in housing.
No, the money for this water reserve is open to the public. It's not for the homeless, specifically homeless people with our Shelter Plus Care grant, nothing like that. It's open to the public. We get numerous calls every day, Rochelle and I both, on people requesting rent and utility assistance. So having this money in-house has been kind of nice, because we haven't had to divvy them out to other places. We've been able to handle them in-house with the similar process. So,
but you have been having to go through that process with each of them.
Rochelle is actually doing that, yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Then I'll help them with their franchise fee application, but then I send it to them for they process it. I help the gentleman with the LEAP application. Metro bus passes, we can do those. So kind of similar to CRC, I have them just for a short time, so I try to give them all the assistance that they can get, or that they can apply for.
So in terms of, let's call it making a good referral, but you go to that extra step and help them actually fill out the app before they go.
Yeah, or, work with them to fill out the application, because they all have to have their signatures, or there's questions like on the LEAP application I wouldn't know to answer unless they're there with me.
Gotcha.
Well, and once we have a common application, it sounds like that'll simplify a lot of this.
Well, partly I'm thinking from the client services point of view, in your discussion of kind of a one-stop shop, there's the, technically there's the one app, but then functionally for the context that they're coming in and getting that assistance, if you could talk for a moment, and then I'll get back with you about what you've got at Community Action, Let's Help, Doorstep. They've got more of an array of, and fill in for me, but budgeting classes, other services, clothing banks.
Well, what we
banks.
try to do, and I think Let's Help and the other organizations, what becomes sort of an operative word is.
Hang on, do you have something you need to share with us before you go? Thank you so much.
No, I have to get to the water plant to deal with a few things. And,
Good luck.
But I just wanted to point out, Suzanne, Brenda, and Nicole, if there's any further utility questions, they're way more knowledgeable than I, so.
Okay, thank you, Doug. All right, thank you.
Well, I think agencies, what they attempt to do, and the operative word has become in the industry bundling, so that if an individual comes in and has rental utility assistance in the part of the intake, we have a questionnaire that asks about their situation in other areas, so that do they have needs that we think we might be able to assist them with. Taxes are one that we provide. There can be food, and we are part of a food pantry and other kinds of issues of that type. If we don't have the service and would recognize that there might be a need there, then we would have a referral system that we would use to get them into contact with agencies that would have that. So it's not that it's an emergency room in a way. I do describe it as an emergency room. The people who come to us are an emergency.
Understood.
And we then take care of them, but that doesn't mean there aren't other needs that we need to address in the process and to connect them with other folks. And
That was my point in asking, because some of you do GED classes,
Right.
do ESL classes,
Right.
a lot of things that can make a difference in making sure that doesn't happen again.
And even if people who are doing our ESL classes, for example, may run into trouble with their renter utilities, and we're at a point where we can assist them on the spot. So it really is an emergency room situation. There are some differences, but the fact is the people who come to us are an emergency. And there will be occasion when the city will call us and ask for our assistance. Now, it's given the funds that we have. And can you help this family out? And it's not uncommon for us to talk with Rochelle or with Corey and say, okay, how can we work on this together to get these people straightened out? I think it's an efficient system. Quite frankly, the discussion of a common intake has been on for years. And I think the feds are moving towards that, and I think it's a good idea. Because now you have a common tracking system, you have a computer system, which basically you feed in the information from an application. When I was involved in the issue of the franchise fee, and it was purely because we have a program for seniors, it really was oriented towards seniors. The original concept of the franchise fee was that seniors would be served with assistance on their water bill because they were falling in the gap where they wouldn't have a disconnect, but their budgets were so tight that they needed some relief. And the franchise fee, and this goes back, I think, prior to the time of you, that the franchise fee was meant to be a relief on the senior budgets. And I think that still is true. I think
Well, it sounded like it. That's one reason I was trying to ask who the clientele were with the programs, because I knew that they varied, but I didn't know the details.
Yeah, well, it's not just seniors, obviously.
No,
It's,
but also, I mean, I've gotten calls too of people when it shifted who they were seniors and their annual thing was to go get the franchise fee and the once a year midwinter utility allowance to get through the winter. That was
Right.
just a routine, and so there was, and I think it got worked out, but there was this discomfort of, oh my gosh, what happened? I was counting on that.
Well, one of the tasks is really to inform the public that is probably in chronic need. I mean, there's LEAP, there's the franchise fee, there are other avenues where people who are at that sort of edge financially and budgetarily can have some resource to. And I think the gap we feel is the emergency room. And prevention is probably the best thing, that if you can get them, if you can get those people into contact with what.
Well, that's why I asked you about the other. I mean, and
Yeah,
everybody, I think their network does pretty well of people being familiar with what the other resources are, but in your agencies, they're in that milieu right then.
Right. Right. Yeah. And you know, you try to help as many people as you possibly can, and it's not possible to assist everyone. But again, my point is that this is a very good system, and it's been set up to be a good system. And I would like to see it continue.
Well, in any,
It's a help to us and to the client.
and that's what's the ultimate goal right there, is the
Right.
clients, and making sure that we get as much help to them as possible. You know, really, in any discussion and combining, I think information sharing is the first phase of that, and this combined application form really, I think, would be the first step in any discussion of that. So I would almost submit that we should try it out for a year and see what happens.
Well, since we're having this discussion, I want other people to have a chance to have some input about whether they see some pressure points or some people we're missing, or some economies as well. Is there anybody else that has any input for this?
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
unless someone steps up, seeing no further discussion on it, I believe that it has been a beneficial discussion, but I'd suggest at this point we move towards closing it out. Obviously, we're already moving towards one application.
Mhm.
I think there's a lot of positives that have come out of this meeting, including TV4, the newspaper reporting on it, and making these programs, more information about these programs available to the public, and I hope to see an increase in folks using these programs. But for now, I think the status quo is good.
Mhm.
We're moving towards one single application, as I mentioned, so I think we should leave well enough alone for
Yep.
this discussion's sake.
I agree. I think the unified form, let's try that out and see what happens, and then revisit in the future if we need to.
Sounds good. And we appreciate you bringing it up, and we just needed to talk through it at a minimum. We didn't have an absolute goal of making any decisions
Mhm.
today or in the future, but if we're satisfied with the input and where people are going. Obviously, if folks have other ideas later, we may or may not be the committee next year, and they may choose to look at that, but we really wanted a chance to just concentrate on this one issue. So thank you, everyone. With that, we have an item on the agenda. Just any other items before the committee? And I was going to ask Corey to give us a quick update on how the allocations process is going.
Sure. Applications are in, and we received 35 programs. I believe 27 agencies, but 35 programs. The review, we created an expert team for the review committee. We're meeting with them next week, and so we'll get them started on the EC impact and getting them to view them at their own leisure, so we don't have to sit in a room all together with the big binder. So they can do that, and then as soon as we kick that meeting off, then I will be getting with all of you in how you can log in and view the applications as well. So we're doing great, on time, everything's looking good. So
Excellent.
minimal problems with EC impact, so it was, I feel, very successful in that short time period that we got that together. So, yeah, that's cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
And to you.
Oh,
for being
thanks.
sort of your idea.
Mhm.
So that
Well, I
all
just
really worked out.
stole it from the United Way. I mean,
Okay.
they're the ones that had it. I still think shamelessly, though.
All right. Any other business? If not, we stand adjourned. Thank you.
Hooray.